Do you remember? You meet someone new. They smile. They say their name. You repeat it politely, and just a few moments later, it disappears. Their face is clear. Their voice is clear. You even remember what they said about their job, but the name is gone. And now your mind starts racing. You hope someone else in the conversation says their name again. You avoid using any name at all. You try to keep the conversation flowing while quietly thinking, I should remember this. Maybe this has happened more than once, maybe many times, and each time it happens, you feel a small moment of embarrassment. You wonder if it makes you look careless, or distracted, or even disrespectful. But psychology suggests something surprising. People who forget names easily are often not careless at all. In many cases, their minds are simply prioritizing a different kind of information. Because when you meet someone for the first time, your brain is doing far more work than it appears on the surface. It is observing their facial expression, noticing their tone of voice, trying to understand the social context, evaluating how to respond, deciding what impression you are making, and often managing a quiet internal dialogue at the same time. Am I speaking clearly? Do I seem confident? What should I say next? All of this happens within seconds. Your attention is spread across many different signals at once, and then suddenly, a new piece of information appears. A name, a simple sound, with no obvious connection to anything you already know. Unlike a story, or an opinion, or a meaningful detail, a name arrives without context. It does not describe the person. It does not explain their personality. It does not immediately connect to an image or idea. It simply exists as a label. And the human brain tends to remember meaning more easily than labels. Research in cognitive psychology has repeatedly shown that information connected to meaning, emotion, or existing knowledge is far easier to retain. When information feels isolated, the brain often does not store it strongly. Not because it is unimportant, but because it lacks anchors. A name is often one of the most abstract pieces of information we encounter in a social interaction. It is a sound, assigned long before you met the person, and it does not automatically tell you anything about who they are. Meanwhile, your brain is busy processing far richer information, how comfortable you feel around them, whether they seem confident or reserved, what they care about, whether the interaction feels natural or tense. Your mind is mapping the emotional tone of the conversation, not just the vocabulary. And this reveals something interesting. People who frequently forget names often remember many other details. They remember where they met someone. They remember what the person said about their interests. They remember how the conversation felt. Sometimes, they even remember small details others overlook. A gesture, a specific phrase, an unusual perspective. Their memory is not empty. It is simply focused on different layers of information. Another reason this happens involves something psychologists call cognitive load. Many introductions happen in environments that already demand attention. Busy offices, social gatherings, group conversations, situations where you are simultaneously listening, thinking, observing, and responding. In these moments, working memory becomes crowded. The brain must choose which signals receive priority, and often it prioritizes information that feels immediately useful for navigating the situation. What to say next, how to respond appropriately, how to interpret the other person's reaction. The name, arriving briefly in the middle of this process, may simply not receive enough attention to be stored deeply. It is not rejected, it is just not reinforced, and reinforcement is essential for memory. Without repetition or meaningful association, information fades quickly. Interestingly, people who experience this often show strong ability in recognizing faces, situations, and emotional patterns. They may quickly recognize someone they met months ago. They remember the environment and context, but the label attached to that person may still feel distant. This suggests their memory system is highly associative. It connects experiences through meaning and pattern rather than through isolated symbols. And names, being highly symbolic, from a psychological perspective, this is not necessarily a weakness. It is simply a difference in how attention distributes importance. Some minds are especially sensitive to emotional cues. Others track logical details. Each cognitive style emphasizes different forms of information, and sometimes Verbal labels receive lower priority. Another layer of this experience involves emotion. Many people who forget names carry quiet concern about how it appears to others. They worry it signals disinterest, or lack of care, or lack of respect. But in many cases, the opposite may be true. Their attention is often directed toward understanding the person more deeply, trying to interpret intentions, trying to respond appropriately, trying to maintain social harmony, which can require significant mental energy. So the brain invests resources in navigating the interaction itself, rather than memorizing the label attached to it. Memory is not a recording device, it is a filtering system. It continuously decides, often unconsciously, what information seems most useful or most meaningful. High emotion is stored strongly. Repeated exposure is stored strongly. But isolated sounds, heard only once, during a moment of divided attention, can easily fade. This does not mean remembering names is unimportant. Names help create connection. They signal recognition. They make interactions more personal. And there are simple techniques that can improve recall. Repeating the name aloud, linking the name to a visual image, associating the name with something already familiar. These methods work because they create the associations that memory relies upon. They transform the name from an isolated sound into something connected. But beyond technique, there is also something helpful in adjusting the interpretation of the experience itself. Forgetting a name does not automatically mean you were not paying attention. It may simply mean your attention was directed toward other dimensions of the interaction: tone, emotion, meaning, context. And over time, this way of processing information can create strong understanding of people, even if the label attached to them occasionally escapes. Some people naturally track social energy. They notice subtle shifts in mood. They remember how someone felt in a particular moment. They remember conversations long after specific details fade. Their memory prioritizes experience over vocabulary, pattern over label, meaning over symbol, and understanding this can reduce the unnecessary self-criticism that often follows small memory lapses. If you often forget names, but remember the person, remember the conversation, remember the feeling of the interaction, it may not mean you were absent. It may mean your attention was engaged in a different way, a way that emphasizes connection, interpretation, and context. So the next time a name disappears moments after you hear it, instead of immediately assuming something is wrong, it may be useful to ask a different question. What was your attention focused on instead? Subscribe to Unspoken Psychology for more interesting pattern, because often the answer reveals far more about how your mind works than the missing name ever could.